Will winter chill and hurricanes affect your January fishing as we go outdoors with Don Dubuc?
There we go, nice little redfish. You know, these next few days are going to put you in the deep freeze, but that doesn't mean the fish are going to stop biting. Got some pretty weather, but it's going to be cold. Bundle up, pay attention to Captain Mike's tips, and you're going to catch some of these. We'll show you all about it. Recent hurricanes did little good for Louisiana marshes, but did create some winter redfish hotspots from trees and other storm debris.
It's been there long enough to have oysters form on it, barnacles will form on it, algae will grow on it, and just those three will start a food chain.
Breezy winds are a byproduct of post-frontal system winter fishing, so you might want to use a drift sock.
And some people call them sea anchors. But that'll slow us down and give us more time to put our lure in the strike zone, which was tight to the storm debris.
Now here's a little tip. Captain Mike's got us fixed up with some of these curly tail baits. And when the water's cold and the fish are slowed down, sometimes that little motion in that curly tail will sucker them in. Live bait can be scarce in cold wintry waters, so throw plastic. Now is the time it can actually outfish the real thing.
The live stuff, just like the fish you're trying to catch, will be cold and become lethargic and not really move around a lot. So the artificial, you can get movement, at least enough. And one rule of thumb that I always think about, always remind my clients of, is in the summertime, a fish will move 20 feet to find your presentation. In the wintertime, he'll barely move 20 inches. So you'll have to work an area over thoroughly, and once you find some, stick with them.
Oh, so here we go. All right, so we're starting off a new year, and we're starting it off cold, but the redfish are there. Just get out there, let that sun warm up. Maybe delay your trip a little bit if you're headed out in the next few days, and get you some of these redfish. Don Dubuc, ABC 26 Sports.
All right. Prefer trout instead of turkey? Let's go outdoors with Don Dubuc.
Yeah, that's a nice fish. Now, who says you can't catch fish when it gets cold? Just follow them to the food, and that's where you're going to find the fish. Thanksgiving week in South Louisiana is a turning point from typical late summer and fall speckled trout techniques to a more of wintertime scenario, both where and how to catch them.
Well, I tell you, I do like to fish the live bait as long as it's available. But as soon as it's no longer available, your plastics are going to be really popular. When you catch a fish, shaking his head, the water's warm enough, and you can be a little more aggressive with your presentation. If he's slow and lethargic, you should fish slow and lethargic.
Mike says where you find winter specks, you'll find redfish too.
Generally, once it gets cold, water temperatures below 55 are always on the bottom, especially earlier in the morning. As the day heats up and the water heats up, they may migrate out onto some of these flats and get into some water warmer temperatures where the baits are, where the fish that they're going to feed on are. And you may be able to use a popping cork for that as well.
With school out and vacation in, the holidays are the busiest and best times for fishermen, but not trophy trout. So keep your expectations realistic.
Oh, if I can catch fish between 13 and 18 inches, that's good. One of the things I do find a lot of people do incorrectly is in the summertime they're looking for a bite every cast. In the wintertime, if you drift through an area and you catch 5, be satisfied. And if you just got to drift it 10 times to catch 50, stick with it.
All right, so if you're thinking speckled trout instead of turkey this Thanksgiving, between now and then, get on out here to the Wrigley's, Pearl River, Lake Bourne area, bring some live bait, and you're going to find you some of these. Don Dubuc, ABC 26 Sports.
All right.
Over the hump, Don Dubuc, you caught some redfish last week.
Yeah, and it was really a lesson, and that's part of what we try to do here is not just show you catching fish, but try to make you a better fisherman. And everybody gets stuck going out there on those days when you just don't have any tide, no tide movement. Captain Mike Gallo and I are going to show you how to make up for that and catch some fish when there's no tide. Mike Gallo.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I just want to make sure about that. We're going to talk about a spectacular tuna trip Sam Barbera made with our old friend Peace Marvel. Hi, welcome back to Paradise, Louisiana. And Mike Gallo, not Mike Callow, but Mike Gallo.
Y'all come on, guys. Y'all did that last time. Mike
No,
Gallo.
Mike, look, if you have the name, you got to live with it, okay? Mike, what happened? Hey, he's turning out to be some kind of fisherman down in the Biloxi Marsh area.
Yeah, well, he fishes Lake Catherine, Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Bourne, but I think he'll tell you his favorite spot is the Biloxi Marsh. Now, the day we went, we had about a 2/10 of a tide range, which
Whoa.
really didn't make him real happy. My suggestion was to go to the Wrigley's because you always got water moving through the Wrigley's, maybe pick up some speckled trout. We tried that early, caught a few small trout, one nice trout, a lot of little croakers and white trout, that type of stuff. Wasn't really happening for us. We decided to make a run across Lake Bourne to the Biloxi Marsh for redfish. Now, basically, when Mike will tell you, when it gets down to 2/10 of a tide, you got to kind of go back to basics. Yeah, you might be able to catch them on the top dogs and the spinners and the spoons and that type of thing, but nothing beats popping cork and a live shrimp when times get tough.
Amen, brother.
And we ended up finding some in some of those ponds. It's a maze back there, beautiful area on the northern end of the Biloxi Marsh. Now, Mike gave us some special tips too, and you might want to make some notes on this. If you ever get stuck on a day when there's just no tide moving, nothing happening, there's some ways you can compensate for that by going to places that will hold fish, that will bite even when the tide's not moving, or find some places where the water is moving even though there isn't a tide range. Here's Captain Mike Gallo telling you how to fish on no tide or low tide range days.
Well, I like to fish confined areas where the water is concentrated into a smaller area. It'll gain velocity, and that velocity will force the bait along, and then it makes a setup where the predators can intercept the prey, like Wrigley's Pass, Unknown Pass, some of those large passes like that, like we fished this morning.
So what's happening is basically lack of tide. You're compensating for it by necking the water down.
Right, the water bottlenecks down and gains velocity. And I was told, or I learned, that when your water is moving over 3/10 of a mile an hour, the bait fish cannot continually swim against it, and they get swept along, which sets up ambush points for the predators.
The difference in fishing slack tide. This is dead slack tide. What about if this were fall or winter? Would you fish it any different, or same principles apply?
Yeah, the same principles would apply. Fall or winter, I'd be fishing the plastic under a cork because the trout will move into the marsh system in the fall or winter, and they're fattening up for that lean winter present. So October, November is a great time to fish in the marsh. A lot of speckled trout. The redfish are here year round, so I catch a lot of those that time of year as well.
Is it possible to use wind-driven water in place of tide, or is that really looks like it's water moving, but it's really not?
Oh, sure. Any type of water movement. Wind-driven. A storm could be 20 miles away and push water in this direction, or pull water. Any type of water movement will help us out. Maybe even rain.
On that, let's go.
Go outdoors with Don Dubuc.
Another one of these bronze treasures. Bring him over here, Mike. All right, another redfish. All right, if you fish coastal Louisiana, you know one of the most important things you got to have a good day is water movement. And that's by good tide. But what happens on days like today where there was 2/10 of a tide? You don't stay home. We'll show you how to catch some. First off, forget artificials and stick with the basics. Live bait on the bottom in deep water and under a cork in shallow water.
See my shrimp jumping? That's a good sign.
When there's no or low tidal range, Captain Mike Gallo says fish in areas that by design will have moving water.
Well, I like to fish confined areas where the water is concentrated into a smaller area. It'll gain velocity, and that velocity will force the bait along, and then it makes a setup where the predators can intercept the prey, like Wrigley's Pass, Unknown Pass, some of those large passes like that.
Another no-tide tip. Fish in areas where fish feeding is less affected when tide range is high or low.
I think of fishing in ponds or larger areas where the tide generally doesn't have a lot of velocity. So on days where the water is not moving, it still doesn't have a lot of velocity, and those fish still feed like they normally would.
If water moves, so does bait, even if it's not the force of natural tides.
Oh, sure, any type of water movement. Wind-driven. A storm could be 20 miles away and push water in this direction, or pull water. any type of water movement will help us out.
Yeah, now there you go. So remember, if the tide is slack, that doesn't mean you got to stay home. You can come out here to the Biloxi Marsh, rig up like Captain Mike, and you'll catch these. Don Dubuc, ABC 26 Sports. Oh, baby.
Hi, welcome back to Paradise, Louisiana. You know, one of the real forgotten places in all of South Louisiana for speckled trout, really for bass too, is the Pearl River.
Well, it's been known a long time for bass, upper and lower Pearl River, the marsh area. It's one of those areas that transitions from flat, open, grassy marsh up to bottomland hardwoods, all in piney woods, all up on the northern end. But right now, this time of the year, we found them there last year, and they're in there again. We're talking good speckled trout. Some folks are picking up redfish. We weren't lucky enough on this last trip, but went with Mike Gallo, Captain Mike, Angling Adventures of Louisiana. He had been on those fish for a while, and as people are finding out, it gets a little bit congested in there, but there's a lot of room. There was probably 10 boats showed up that day, and everybody was catching speckled trout. And these are not the big trout that you're going to find out in Lake Pontchartrain or Wrigley's. These are your schoolie trout. But there's plenty of them, a couple of ways to catch them. Mike is famous for his drop shot rig, which is really just a fancy term for sinker on the bottom with a hook a little bit above it to keep from getting snagged on the bottom. We were fishing with some beautiful live bait that's still available at either Chef Harbor Marina, you can get them over there, or you can get them at the Wrigley's Marina for a while. That's probably coming to an end pretty soon, depending on water temperature. But a lot of people were throwing plastic and bouncing them, and they were catching fish there. We ended up, I think we had probably 42 keepers and didn't really fish a whole day. A lot of throwbacks. You're going to have to kind of go through them, but had a great time fishing out there. And it's easy enough. You can come in from several ways. You can come in from the Chef area. You can come in from Wrigley's Marina down to Wrigley's. Or if you got a small boat, you can launch up on 90 on the Pearl and just run straight down.
That's one good way to do it. In fact, it's a little bit of open water, but if you know how to run it in a small boat, you can get there.
Yeah, and it's a place where no matter what wind you got, you're out of the wind, you can fish in there. You kind of look for the drop-offs, look for the currents moving along the edges there. And like I said, we caught redfish there this time last year.
Is this seasonal, or is it controlled by the stage of the river? Like the river, the Mississippi's real down, real low right now, water's clear everywhere. And is that the same way it works with Pearl River?
Actually, the Pearl, that lower Pearl, you can catch speckled trout and reds pretty much all year round. Just for some reason, this time of the year, they seem to congregate a little better in there. Salinities have been higher, water's lower. And to be honest with you, it's one of the few places you can get out and fish when you can't fish in some of the others, so people go there where normally they might fish a different area. But it's a good place to fish, and we got a few extra tips. Mike Gallo, a guy that fishes a lot of the area around there. He fishes Chef, Lake Bourne, Biloxi Marsh, Pontchartrain, Lake Catherine, and he also includes the Pearl River. And here's some tips, particularly if you're going to be fishing during these colder months in the river.
Well, I tell you, I do like to fish the live bait as long as it's available. But as soon as it's no longer available, your plastics are going to be really popular. I like the curl tail plastics this time of year, 3/8 or a 1/4 ounce jig head. Slowly work him on the bottom and pay close attention when you catch a fish. Does he shake his head, or is he just lethargic on the surface? And that'll give you a clue as to how fast you can fish. If he's shaking his head, the water's warm enough, and you can be a little more aggressive with your presentation. If he's slow and lethargic, you should fish slow and lethargic. Generally, once it gets cold, water temperatures below 55, they're always on the bottom, especially earlier in the morning. And as the day heats up and the water heats up, they may migrate out onto some of these flats and get into some warmer temperatures where the baits are, where the fish that you're going to feed on are. And you may be able to use a popping cork for that as well. I still like the curly tails on a popping cork, and I use a light jig head whenever I fish the popping corks, an 1/8 or a 1/16 of an ounce jig head in that instance.
But did make a fishing trip, and we'll take a look at that. Mike Gallo, we talk about bass fishing for speckled trout all the time. This is going to be bass fishing techniques to redfish. Pretty interesting concept.
Well, you can't miss with that. Folks have been doing that for a long time. But that guarantees that you're going to see some very interesting approaches to redfish. And Hi, welcome back to Paradise, Louisiana. And Don Dubuc, you get to do some fascinating things, I know, but bass fishing for redfish,
Well,
might be one of the most unusual ways you approach this next segment.
oh, people are going to say, well, why in the heck do you have to fish redfish like bass? They're not near as finicky a fish. Well, you know, this time of the year, when it gets real cold and scatters them and slows them down, it's a little difficult to pick them up when you have to. One of the places I went, Captain Mike Gallo, Angling Adventures of Louisiana, he fishes that Chef, Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Catherine, Lake Bourne. It's like, have boat, we'll fish. Well, he decided we were going to try to fish in a place called the Bypass Canal. This is not hard to find. A lot of people familiar with it. I've fished there several times, and what it's primarily known for, it's a little deeper water. It's a deeper channel, man-made cut that connects the Chef Pass area with the intercoastal waterway. And so basically connects the two. It's deeper water. When the marsh water gets sucked out, water temperatures start to drop. That's a natural spot for the redfish to stack up in there. And it's actually been improved by Hurricanes Gustav and Ike. When I say that, there's some storm debris that's been moved in there. A lot of it's been taken out, but some of the natural debris, trees, stumps, limbs, you'll see them. They're in there. Particularly, you'll see a lot of them when the water's down. And that has become some new habitat for the redfish that are normally in there to escape the cold temperatures. They get into the Bypass Canal. Now they're congregating at these tree stumps and roots and branches. Now, what that means is you're fishing structure like you're fishing bass. The way we fished them in there, rig up real light on your jig head, a 1/8 ounce jig head. When you're fishing with the jig head, you want one that's going to have a weed guard on it, just like you would have fishing for freshwater, give you a little chance to ride over those stumps. You're going to get hung up, but you're not going to get hung up as much if you got that weed guard on there. I was using a Yum curly tail bait. Mike was using similar baits. Again, you got to have something with a lot of motion in the tail because your retrieve is going to be very slow because of the cold water. And also you want to keep it in that strike zone for as long as you possibly can. So when you're retrieving it, you want some natural action. Again, you got to be ready. Feel that sensitive tip. You might want to fish with some of the, the braided lines for the strength. I was using monofilament. You can go either way. But the key is fish like you're fishing bass. Think bass. Bounce it over that structure. You're going to feel the structure. Ride it over the top. Let it sit there. If you got a good tidal range, it'll move that little tail if you got a good curly tail, and be ready to set that hook. Right. Now, these are not your big bull redfish. We did catch excess of 20 inches, but I'll be looking for 27 and up bull reds in here. It's going to be your smaller redfish. They're not going to be as aggressive as when you think redfish pull it off, and when the fight is even a little bit slower until they get started, a little sluggish. But it's a great place to fish. It's easily accessible. You can launch at Fort Pike. You can launch at the Chef area. Find it, look for it on the maps. It's called the Bypass Canal, and this time of the year when the water goes out, temperature cools down, it's going to hold redfish. And generally when you find one or two in that debris, you're going to find more fish. Just kind of pass back and forth and fish in there. It's a great trip. Mike Gallo's got some advice, more advice on how to fish that area. If you're going to be doing some bass fishing for redfish in the wintertime, here it is.
Yeah, this time of year I really use my depth finder quite a lot, as well as my temperature gauge. If the water temperature is 53 degrees or below, I'll start my day off hunting redfish. And if it warms up above 53, I'll try to catch some trout. This morning we fished some storm debris where I located some redfish. Redfish being a hardier fish, a little bit more durable, the water temperature doesn't affect them until it gets in the mid-40s. So we were able to catch some good redfish this morning, fishing some storm debris, some trees, things that had oyster shells and barnacles growing on them. We had to use a weedless jig head to get in there tight to where the fish were, but that's where we caught the majority of our redfish this morning. And one rule of thumb that I always think about, always remind my clients of, is in the summertime, a fish will move 20 feet to find your presentation. In the wintertime, he'll barely move 20 inches. So you'll have to work an area over thoroughly, and once you find some, stick with them. Fish them hard. If you drift an area that's 200 yards long and you pick up 5 fish, just keep drifting it, because in reality, making 5 drifts to catch 25 trout is really not a lot of drifts. If each drift only took 15 or 20 minutes, you could have a productive day.